Welcome to With All Due Respect, where we have conversations about theology and culture with respect and grace. I'm Michael Jensen and...
I'm Megan Powell-Dutois.
We do all right for a Christian podcast.
All right, yeah.
All right. And that's, and we're ambitious, but it's a niche market in Australia. According to the Australian Podcast Ranker, the top three genres for December 2025 were news, current affairs, society and culture, and then coming in third, do you know what it is?
True crime. And I believe during the mushroom trials, it was up much higher, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I certainly contributed to that.
Yes, me too.
Podcasting might be a relatively new genre, but true crime is not a new genre. It's got its beginnings in the 16th century when literacy was becoming more widespread and cheap pamphlets about murder, trial accounts, and even popular ballads on the subject were popular in Britain. Last year, it seemed the whole country was consuming accounts of the mushroom murder trials, which was the subject of multiple podcasts.
Yeah, not just often it's just one, but I remember at the time, you'd bring up your podcast app and you go, there's 10, we've got 10 options here.
No, that's true. So why does it have such a fascination for us, and is it a healthy one? First up, we have Professor Catharine Lumby, a media expert and a Christian, to talk about the phenomenon. Then Megan and I discuss together the spiritual impact of consuming true crime for entertainment before we watch together a crime movie, which is a fiction, but, well, maybe still true.
Be our guest, opening up the conversation to others. Professor Catharine Lumby is Chair of the Department of Media and Communication at the University of Sydney. Before entering academia, she was a journalist writing for the Sydney Morning Herald, the ABC and the Bulletin. And after obtaining her PhD from Macquarie University, she became the Foundation Chair of the Media and Communications Department at the University of Sydney, then further stints at the UNSW and Macquarie Universities before returning to the University of Sydney, where she is now. A writer and media commentator, her research interests include gender, sexuality and popular culture. So she should be right on the zeitgeist with this one. Welcome, Catharine. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Now, do you yourself consume true crime?
Yeah, that's a great question, Megan. I can tell you this, that as a teenager, and in my early 20s, I consumed a lot of fictional crime stuff,
right,
like Patricia Cornwell, serial killer novels, and also I remain until this very day a great fan of slasher films. And I just want to say something about why that is before we come to true crime.
Yes.
Now, I've thought about this a lot, but when you think about movies, the only place teenage girls are the real heroes, that they get real agency, are in those slasher films, right?
Yes,
So you think about the character Neve Campbell plays, Sidney Prescott in the Scream movies, and she's surrounded by the idiot father and the stupid cop and the sexist boys at school, right? And who has to go and find the killer? It's the teenage girl.
Yes, yes.
Right? And I think there's something about, as a teenage girl, you walk around with all these messages about be careful how you dress, it's all self-protective, and you develop a kind of fear of being looked at and potentially stalked. And those stories for me were a way of restoring agency, because they recognize that teenage girls have other kinds of power. And so I think, and I know we're going to come probably to talk about women and true crime.
Yes, sure.
Because they're a big part of the audience. But I do think sort of talking about that gives you a sort of a look into the space that from the age of being an adolescent, women are kind of taught to be vigilant and afraid of men.
Absolutely. And there is, as you're saying, the stats are saying overwhelmingly the consumers of true crime are women. I don't myself consume it. I think I'm just too anxious a personality. But I agree with you. I think it's about a form of empowerment. And again, I was thinking of Buffy the Vampire Slayer when you were talking about slasher films as well, and her popularity, well, different reasons perhaps for young men and young women with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So you were really into fictional crime when you were younger.
I was. Yes, I was.
Now, are you into true crime or just fictional crime still? Or
Look, I'll be really honest. I mean, I'm too busy reading political philosophy these days as a boring academic. But I certainly empathise with the interest that women have in true crime, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And I think, I mean, there are many things to say about that. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or down the track.
Well, I mean, I think it'd be great to kind of actually plunge right into that question about why, what is it about women and true crime? What is it that attracts and repels at the same time?
So, I mean, we know that we are still living in a society where across all classes there are horrific rates of domestic violence and sexual assault. And child sexual abuse, sadly enough, which while we focus on institutional child sexual abuse, we're very loath to focus on how much it happens in the family, because families are meant to be sacrosanct and safe. And so I think that often when these things are reported in the media, they're reported by court reporters, and it's quite abstract. It's somewhat removed. The victims can become somewhat abstract. And I think true crime is an opportunity to really perhaps understand things from the victim's point of view, the survivor's point of view, when it's done well, when it's not done in a sort of horribly voyeuristic way.
Yes.
And as someone who's studied law, I've thought about this a terrible lot. When I was studying criminal law, and I was doing a black letter law at Sydney Uni degree, and I went up to the lecturer somewhat naively and I said, "So what happens to people after they're sentenced?"
Yes.
And he said, "What? We're not here to teach that. That's criminology." And I'd started practicing as a freelance journalist, right? So it was a little bit bolshy, and I got myself a pass to Long Bay Jail because I wanted to see with my own eyes. And it was very interesting because I was a young woman, and so they gave me all this information about covering every part of my body and not making eye contact with the prisoners. And I had guards with me, and we went into maximum security where it's all glass-walled cells. And the prisoners came in from the exercise yard and started changing out of their exercise gear into their prison greens. And do you know, not one of them looked my way. And what I realised was that they had internalised surveillance to this extraordinary extent. And it was a sort of view into our carceral systems and their invisibility. And I guess what I was trying to do was humanise what the justice process was for. And I think when people are reading true crime, if they're, at their best, they're motivated by a desire to really understand what seem like very abstract processes, our courts, our legal institutions, our penal system, and really sort of understand how that functions. How do we restore moral order, and what does that really look like?
Well, there's so many things to unpack there. What were you going to say, Megan?
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about that and thinking it's not, I think, as a woman here, reflecting, not just understanding the victim, but I feel as myself as a woman that I'm always trying to understand the perpetrator, because that's a defensive strategy, right? So I find that I'm very good at picking up, perhaps too good, and then overanalyzing micro communications and micro expressions, because I need to understand where a potential perpetrator or potential danger is coming from. So do you think that might be at play too? Or?
Definitely. I think there's a protective mechanism. Look, every woman in this country, if you're walking down a dark street, will put her keys between her fingers or look over her shoulder, or like we've internalized that kind of surveillance, right, and that kind of threat and risk. So I think there's also a big element of trying to understand what motivates, if we're talking about gendered violence, what motivates these men? How is it? Because we're largely surrounded by good men. What goes wrong? And I think, we have a tendency to want to see perpetrators as evil monsters over here, particularly with child sexual abuse, which is, of course, one of the most horrendous crimes we can imagine. The pedophile is the other, the monster who lurks over there, who's somehow inhuman. And yet the reality is, as we know from the Royal Wood Commission, that a lot of child sexual abusers are opportunists. They are apparently ordinary men. And I think there's a deep fascination with how those two things can coexist.
Yeah, I think this is some of the puzzle. I mean, at one level, true crime is much less neat than fictional crime, right? There's nothing tidy, and you might actually be watching something where there is no answer, or it's or the puzzle is the human puzzle. And I think often, while it might be empowering to victims, it's also just this puzzle of what does it take for a person who is someone like us to flip into doing something so catastrophic, so demonic. I mean, along those lines, seeing the movie Nuremberg recently was the same puzzle. Is Hermann Goering, is he normal, which is much more frightening prospect, or is he demonic, which I can kind of handle in one way? I can say he's exceptional, but he's not exceptional.
And see, that's a very interesting point, Michael, because if we're talking in secular terms, I mean, if we look at it through a Christian lens, it's a whole other lens to start thinking about these things with, I think. But, I mean, Hannah Arendt famously wrote about the banality of evil and the fact that a lot of the people, who joined the Nazi Party and who, in fact, participated in the Holocaust were kind of, her argument is they were following orders, and that there is that part of being human is wanting to be part of the in-group, wanting to fit in, not wanting to be cast out. I mean, one of the questions that fascinates me, if we're thinking about human behaviour, is the people who were part of the resistance. When my kids were 8 and 10 years old, we were in Paris, and I had a book that showed where all the people who hid Jewish families lived. And I walked my kids around Paris to those apartment buildings. And I said, the woman who lived here who hid a whole Jewish family, her husband was at war, she had 2 teenage children, and she risked their lives along with her own to hide this family. Now, why did she do that? None of us know what we would do in that situation. And I think these come to very fundamental questions, not just about good and evil, but about what is our capacity for doing good. We like to think we're good people, but until we're tested, how do we know?
Exactly. That thought frightens me deeply. That's the thing. I'm terrified by that, which gives me a fascination for true crime, to be honest.
Yeah. I think that true crime is part of that. It's not just empathizing with the survivor, but it is also trying to, I think at its deepest, realizing that none of us are that far. Like, if we just figure the perpetrator as a monster, that's easy. They're over there, they're demonic, as Michael said. But a lot of these people are ordinary people, and I think part of it is that, if we're people who sort of think ethically and deeply, it prompts us to question ourselves about, who we really are and how we, stay true to our values, I suppose.
And so in that sense, it's one of the attractions of true crime, an attempt to find some sort of moral order within quite a chaotic world.
It is absolutely about, I think you just put it beautifully, it is about trying to make, I think in a very secular society particularly, where a lot of people are not religious, they're looking in other places to think about moral order and right and wrong and good and evil, if we put it in its extremes. And I think true crime is a sort of lens for making sense of that. I think about Teacher's Pet, that fabulous podcast that really kicked off true crime podcasting in this country, Linton Besser. And, I mean, that's a story about an ordinary school teacher in the Northern Beaches who's a predator, essentially. So this is an ordinary dude. He's not your monster. He's, a sports teacher. He's sort of relatable. And I think that part of the popularity of that is trying to understand how he could be both of those things at once.
What about the element of voyeurism here? What makes me a bit uncomfortable about true crime is that there are real human beings involved, and we are kind of peering in on their suffering. It's not fictionalized. I mean, fiction at least gives us a distance of knowing this is a thought experiment. No real humans are harmed in the making of this tragedy. But when it comes to true crime, these are real people. So does that make us uneasy, or ought it make us uneasy about consuming true crime?
Oh, I think this is such an important question, Michael. I thought about this when I was a journalist. I wasn't a court reporter, but I used to look, I suppose as someone who's always been interested in gender equity and social justice, I used to read those court reports very carefully. And, unfortunately, we still have the ideal victim or survivor, as I would put it, the attractive Anglo girl,
Yes.
right? They're a more valuable victim than a First Nations woman in the country who's, been sexually assaulted or endured terrible domestic violence. So I think there's a commodification of that kind of victim, and I think this is really wrong. I think it's also very voyeuristic. And I've got to say, if I'm just sticking to the media rather than going to true crime podcasts and television series, I at times I think reporting has got a lot better than it was in the 80s and 90s in my day. But I think when I read stories about, child sexual abusers, for instance, or serial rapists, I look at those stories kind of with one hand across one eye, and part of what I'm looking for is this salacious? Is it encouraging a kind of voyeurism that is disrespectful to the survivor? And I don't think we've got there yet. I think the other thing that I think about a lot is the re-traumatization of the families and friends of survivors, because when these things catch fire and people have this sort of, sitting back in your lounge room with a bowl of popcorn approach to it, these things happen to real people, and not just to the individual, but to the families and friends. I mean, this is and anyone who's been through a court case will tell you, our courts are adversarial, our criminal justice system is adversarial. It's a re-traumatization. And then to have it then mediatized and packaged up for people's viewing and listening pleasure, I think, this is the downside. There's a real risk that this is a re-traumatization as a form of entertainment at its worst.
So, I mean, some true crime it's become a high literary form, or going all the way back to Truman Capote and In Cold Blood, Janet Malcolm, and our very own precious Helen Garner.
Yeah.
Do they do it better?
What's the difference?
What do they do that makes it better?
Well, look, Helen Garner's my favourite writer, full stop, the end in the world.
Yeah, mine too. That's kind of...
I mean, I've had the pleasure and privilege of meeting Helen and talking to her about these things. And the thing about Helen is, well, she's got a mind like a scalpel. She has empathy, deep empathy, and I think that grounds and founds her approach to writing about these issues. She's deeply curious about humans and human nature. And I don't want to speak for her, but my understanding is that she sees herself as someone who can bring that depth and that humanizing quality to really important stories that people are fascinated by at a superficial level. So she's, you think of Joe Chinquest's Consolation, for instance. Of course, we've now got the mushroom tapes. And she has a capacity also to humanize things. I mean, I'll give you a great example. It's not from a crime thing she wrote, but there's an essay she wrote at the morgue, and she spent a week in the morgue and she watched morticians do their work and autopsies. And she talks about they peeled the skin off the scalp of a corpse, and then they had to stitch it back up. And she says the mortician leaned down and wiped the mouth of the corpse with the same gesture a mother makes wiping Vegemite off a child's face. And you can see that. It takes it right out of the clinical domain and it makes it human. And I think that when you read her writing, she's very alert to people as humans in these situations. And, of course, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood is a classic. Janet Malcolm I also love. And I think all of them share this concern to get away from the sort of good and evil, scary stuff, to the fact that we're dealing with deep humanity, even when people have committed terrible crimes, that there is still a human there, that no one is beyond redemption, I suppose. It's not like she's excusing them, but she wants to understand what happened there and why they acted the way they did.
It's so interesting because empathy's become quite a derided or contested quality in the current climate. But you're kind of saying perhaps that's the difference between a look at crime, which is just purely salacious, and when we're examining crime in a way that actually helps us socially, that helps us to understand each other.
Absolutely. Look, for me, empathy is the highest quality. You know, forget PhDs or any of these things. For me, the thing I look for and value most in other humans is empathy. And for me, at the heart of empathy is a recognition of your own failings, of your own flaws, and your own, you know, we all sort of stand on the brink of, well, in religious terms, sinning, but in secular terms, you know, acting against our own values. And so I think that it also causes us to reflect on those things. But I do think empathy is the starting place, and it's not the starting place in our justice system, unfortunately, which, as I said, is adversarial and highly legalistic, not fit for human consumption, perhaps.
I'll pass that on to the judges, I know. Although, actually, I think they feel this exactly. You know, I in talking to people in the legal profession who are good people, I think they can see exactly what they're seeing. They just have to live in it somehow and operate with what it is, the blunt instrument that it is.
And I agree, Michael. Can I just rush to say I agree with that? I know it because I went to law school. I happen to know a few judges. I think of Michael Lee, who gave a terrific judgment, you know, in that recent case. And so, yes, of course, they're not inhumane. It's a system that's set up to be adversarial. But the best judges navigate that and help people navigate it.
Kind of wrapping it up, actually, everything you're saying, I think, is pressing toward the gospel in a way. It's pressing towards what is our answer to a world in which do we have the answer to our own inability to do what we want to do, our own values, as you say, in a secular way, our own sin or other people's sin? I mean, you're kind of pressing into something perhaps that true crime doesn't give us when we're looking at it.
Well, from a Christian perspective, I mean, you know, redemption, the capacity for redemption is at the heart of the Christian doctrine. And I think from the outside that can be misunderstood as some sort of wishy-washy free pass.
Yes.
It's certainly not that.
No, indeed, like it's a grappling with, as you've been talking all the way through, a grappling with the sin inside yourself, in the human dilemma, I suppose.
Yeah, and it is a dilemma, and I think we all live with it, and I think living actively with that knowledge is critical. So I think when true crime gets reduced to sort of black and white, good and evil, but I mean, in reality, that misses the fact that a lot of crimes are they're not about evil monsters. They're about structural things. They're about lost opportunities, really, which could be, you know, opportunities to engage in a religion and learn that way, or just opportunities to make different choices. And these things can be structural. We live in a very socially unjust society, in my view, and that plays into choices that people make.
I absolutely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I was going to say the question of a divine justice, I think, comes up, like whether you've got a karmic view or whether you've got sort of it doesn't have to be a kind of a secular karma view. I think, you know, some people have, but the hope for a divine justice kind of gives a sort of backdrop to the presence of or the difficulty we have in actually enacting proper justice, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am, just to pick up on your structural element, because that's something I do quite a lot of writing about, the place of women in the church. And as I describe it, sometimes people just want me to take a more individualistic viewpoint as to what's happening. But it is so much systems and So if we don't really engage with the systems, we can't really bring the proper change, I think, that can enable people to flourish and enable people to live lives that are truer to themselves. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we look at the First Nations community and we look at the history of colonisation and what that's wrought, the injustices that's wrought on our First Nations people, this approach, I think there was an intervention at some point that I remember, and I thought it was very badly and poorly structured and managed, this idea that these people can't manage themselves. And so the answer is more white saviourhood, going into those communities. I mean, the answer, I cannot speak, of course, for Aboriginal people, but, from the Aboriginal people I know, they will say self-determination and agency is the answer to dealing with deeply embedded structural issues around, say, domestic violence in those communities. So from a social justice point of view, there's a lot of work to be done before someone arrives at the criminal justice position. And if we support those sort of communities better, then I think we're starting at the root cause of the problem, not at the end of the road.
Look, I'm a social worker's daughter, so absolutely agreeing about all the pre-work there. And perhaps even now, identified another element that we need alongside in terms of our consumption of true crime. We need to have, I think, more investigation, whether that's fictional or not, about what are the societal dynamics and so on that are leading to outcomes that we get. And in a way that engages people in the way that true crime does, I think.
It's got to be engaging. And this is the thing, of course, this true crime has been studied across criminology, media and communications, psychology, sociology, but you can't just have some – people aren't interested in boring academics, propounding theories, let's face it, okay?
Indeed.
It's got to be entertaining. And we live in a world, let's face it, where this is something else we haven't talked about, is, why has there been such a rise in popularity? Well, part of that is that, the Fourth Estate, the traditional place where crime was reported through court reporters, et cetera, there's a diminishing interest in that. And so there's some good things that have come out of it, like the rise of the podcast. I think podcasts are great.
Yes.
And
podcasts are terrible. Hang on, we're on a podcast.
No, your podcast
depends which podcast.
Absolutely. In a way, in this kind of post Fourth Estate world, people are consuming things differently, and so I think there are many positives about true crime. I think it is most people, I think, come to it with a deep interest in humanity and what humanity is capable of, and hopefully with a lot of empathy for the survivors. I don't think that, and the fact that a lot of women consume it, there's long narrative that women are, easily led astray and, they're consumerist and that they seek entertainment and triviality rather than, sort of serious, rational public sphere stuff.
Yes.
But I don't think that's why women consume it at all. No, I think there are multiple reasons, but I think women probably tend to be empathetic towards survivors.
Well, thanks for joining us, Catharine. It's been great to have you with us. We've had so many interesting sort of channels of thought and possible tangents, including the idea of a post-Fourth Estate world. And, we might have to have you back on again to talk about that possibility. That could be intriguing, but thanks for joining us.
A great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Still to come, we've discussed why true crime is popular, but is it good for us? Well, that's next, and then we get the knives out. For argument's sake, where we take a debate, cut out the party politics and try to talk it out. Now, people are divided about the popularity of true crime, I think. On the one hand, it shows an admirable desire for justice and a deep-seated belief in the truth. On the other hand, Some wonder whether it's good for us to be entertained by stories of terrible horrors and evils, particularly when those stories are real and involve real people who are
Yes, we're taking
suffering
joy out of
terribly.
people who've actually suffered.
Well,
yeah,
we're kind of fascinated. There's a fascination
Yes,
we have. We're taking joy, but what are we to make of the fact that it's most popular with women as well? Now, Megan, I believe you're a woman. Are you a true crime buff?
I'm not. No, but I did get drawn into the mushroom trials and all the permutations of that because, yeah, it was just such a bizarre story, I think. But if you're more likely to be the victim of crime than the perpetrator of crime, then I think something which talks about or is seeking to get justice for the victims of crime is obviously really attractive in some way. It's a satisfaction of seeing things worked out or trying to work things out, which perhaps you don't feel necessarily that in reality is justice really being served a lot of the time.
Yeah, although true crime often justice isn't being worked out. Partly it isn't. Partly there's still a question left open for many things. They're not solved.
Yeah. Well, but isn't the whole thing that you want them to be solved? Like people listen to these unsolved murders and, have actually helped to.
Oh yeah. So maybe
them.
I can help them too.
Yeah.
And again, I'll pose it as a question because I don't want to just generalize too much. But is it the case that part of the fascination is to do with motivation, and that, let's generalize, women are kind of more interested in the kind of the what could make someone go to these lengths? What is the situation that would lead this person into that?
I mean, again, that's protective, isn't it? If you're more likely to be the victim of a crime, then you have to learn to read the room and work out who might perpetrate the crime and why might they do it. It's a life skill.
That was a flip with the mushroom.
Yes, maybe that's
because
why
there was a female perpetrator.
People found it so intriguing, I think.
And I thought listening to, and I would encourage people to listen to or read Helen Garner's book on the subject. She asked these questions about perpetrators. Erin seems so normal. So what would flip her over? What is the situation that would make? Could that be me? Her life seems just like anyone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
She's just making lunch.
Hanging out with Baptist pastors.
So what?
Sounds like mine.
What could flip it over into doing something so dark, so diabolical? And could that be me? What conditions would flip someone in this way?
So far, I think we've been talking about potentially good motivations, I suppose.
For watching
or
crime.
consuming
Good
in some way.
motivations for killing.
No,
right? Okay,
yeah. That idea of justice is to be found, or how can we prevent crime, or how we can be protective towards people around crime. And I think that they're there. I do think that most of us, when we watch, whether it's true crime or a fictionalised crime, for the most part, we're wanting justice to be served. We want the truth to come out. We want the good guys to win. There are occasional exceptions to that. And then we all feel a bit funny about it, when there's a very charismatic villain. And we're like, should I actually like this person?
Yeah, or when perhaps there's a circumstance under which we hope that we see that the person probably, like the situation where the person killed or hurt actually deserved it in the terms of the story told. Mm-hmm. And so we're really glad that actually the perpetrator got away with it because the perpetrator had some justification, we might say. So there's those sorts of stories too. Mm-hmm. We might say, oh, well, isn't it great that they actually got away with it? Because if there was strict justice served, human justice served here, there would be a kind of, we think, universal injustice.
I mean, sometimes it's the tone of it. Like, I actually find it easier to watch or read or whatever comedic versions of crime stories. So, for instance, I think we looked at Deadlock, in which, like, there's a whole lot of people killed, but they kind of all deserve it. So
I can't even remember that. Yeah.
Like set in Tasmania with the...
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah, and you're kind of like, well, I mean, I'm not feeling too bad because they're all kind of were...
Yeah, that's a kind of moral. It's interesting. There's a sort of implicit moral in there.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing as Christians, that there is, in a lot of versions of crime stories, implicit morality, implicit justice, a belief in truth, as was said in the intro, that, we think that truth can be found, that it should be found, that it's there to be found, right?
Yeah, we do, and but we also are kind of we're so frustrated by its difficulty, how difficult it is from this human side to discover it, and actually to measure justice as well. It always feels hollow at the end. A strangely sort of this hollow feeling, even when a person's given a life sentence, it doesn't feel commensurate.
Yeah, and I want to suggest, though, a potential drawback, which might not be the drawback you'd imagine. So we can look about salaciousness later. I think there's something going on with that. But I also think one of the drawbacks is that, there's a lot lacking in a lot of our justice systems, right?
Yeah.
But you can kind of get that everything gets sorted out. It's tied up neatly, like, for instance, at a procedural show or whatever, and therefore, but still not give your time to actually ensuring that justice occurs, that we fix up systems or whatever. It's kind of a false satisfaction, perhaps.
In fictional shows?
Or not just in fiction, but even just the idea that I'm getting that satisfaction from a story, but in actuality there's still lots of injustices and things don't really get sorted.
Human justice is deeply imperfect.
Yeah. And sort of like we kind of give up on the idea that perhaps we could fix that up, and we merely get that desire for, things for closure or for justice to happen kind of gets moved aside into entertainment. Does that make?
Yeah. So are you saying that really true crime plays us, it's not as true as it sounds? One level, the true crime genre enables us to believe that there's more neatness.
There's more neatness, yes, or perhaps even that.
Than there actually is.
Yeah, and I think we are drawn to it because we realise there is so many problems in the world.
Yeah.
But in reality, true crime is not going to help you resolve those problems.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think it goes back to I do think it goes back to this kind of curious motivation that we're just fascinated by what could cause someone who's relatively normal to do something beyond, outrageous or evil. How is that even possible? I mean, stories about psychopaths are kind of they're just horrific, but psychopaths are dull. It's when seemingly ordinary people do things that you go, wow, how did that happen? And then you've got something to talk about because it's mysterious. I think in one sense it's the mystery. Things are not, this is the opposite point. Things are not neat in true crime because that gives us more to analyse.
But I wonder too, so coming back to my other point about salaciousness, I think, and so thinking about how the human body works, it's the same kind of thing about why people like roller coasters. I don't like roller coasters, which probably shows what I don't like. I do not have an adrenaline addiction at all, except for maybe saying my thoughts to go out into the public arena. But that kind of like the thrill of being able to read about horrible things, which are kind of a bit scary, but you're sort of distanced from them in the sense that you're consuming them as an entertainment product, but you still get to enjoy that little fillip in your body, you know what I mean? Like wanting some kind of sensation as well. That kind of, oh my goodness, that's horrible. Oh, how could someone do that? Like that, it produces sensation and you can chase that sensation, right?
Yeah, that's the horrific, and that's the kind of why perhaps the very forensic nature of a lot of crime where we go into the actually literal gory details of what happened, where we're kind of interested in like the dismemberment of the human body in that way. It's too awful to look at that we're deeply fascinated, and so that we're deeply fascinated in it. I wonder though if the Bible itself contains at its heart a true crime, in that the cross itself is a kind of true crime. It's an injustice, but there's a horrible act that comes from a kind of mysterious human desire from fear and from love of violence and from wanting to exclude and belittle, all of that. And we see it. It's the kind of worst of human evil displayed for us in that. But in a way, we have an alternate explanation as well. It's kind of that wonderfully complex event, which gives us so much. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, not just the cross,
Bible
but
is true crime.
The Bible does have a lot of stories of crime.
It's a realistic book.
It's a very realistic book, and it doesn't shy away from, it's kind of like whenever you're sort of thinking about, the children might be in at church when we're talking about, and this Bible passage is going to get read out, you actually do have to wonder about, can they be present for this? Like, there's so much there that's realistic. Is the Bible salacious, though?
No, there's a reserve there.
Yeah.
We don't get a sort of a visceral depiction of Jesus' suffering. It's not as it's depicted in art, which is often very visceral. It's quite bare the way it's described.
I mean, there's some...
The fixation is not on the horror.
Yes, there are some things which obviously, if you understand them, are really horrific, but I don't think it's sort of chasing after...
It's quite the opposite of the gladiatorial games, which are a spectacle of violence. And that's where I think you were heading with this sort of salaciousness about violence, which it's sort of like a little bit slower paced than the gladiatorial games. But the spectacle of violence in the arena, in the Roman arena, is of the dismemberment of the human body by wild animals or by gladiators, etc. That's not how the Gospels depict the death of Jesus. They depict it in a much more reserved way, because the focus is not on the horror so much.
There is kind of, and I think always in a world with sin, there will always be that tension of it's easy to sort of go, I want to think about what is good and honourable and true, right? But that doesn't mean, therefore, like turning away and just, reading comfort fiction
No.
and avoiding the difficult. But also, on the other hand,
cakes and cats, only,
it doesn't sort of drag you down into, I'm reading about sin merely for the delight of sin. That's obviously where it's become problematic.
Yeah, I think that's where we might, as Christians, say, look, I'm wallowing. It's worth us being realistic, because the Bible is realistic. The Book of Judges, my goodness, but that really is a horrific little narrative.
Oh,
but
the tent peg.
But and more. But
Yes.
why? But it's not there in order to titillate or kind of fascinate. It's there. It is there. It is shocking because it is shocking. Because we're meant to be repelled by evil. And so, again, if this is just mere entertainment, then I think we're actually trespassing on the people involved. I feel that with the mushroom tapes and realising that there are real people here. I mean, even talking about it now, I feel like in one sense, there were real people involved who suffered terribly, and even listening to a podcast about it feels like a trespassing on their suffering in a way.
Similarly, like I think someone was saying, I said, we're doing this episode in True Crime, they said, are you going to get the victim, the survivor from the mushroom trials on as a guest? And I said, oh my goodness, no, not at this stage. Like, I just sort of went, just revulsed, I suppose, not revulsed, but kind of went, oh no, that would be really inappropriate. Because, of course, you can't do something in a way in which it becomes destructive towards the people who've already experienced trauma and that kind of thing. So
yeah, it's not entertainment.
There's a care and love that needs to be there. Yeah.
That's right.
Still to come, we've been talking about true crime, but for Through the Wardrobe, we watched a fictional crime film which had matters of faith at its heart. That's next. Through the Wardrobe, finding truth through story. Wake Up Dead Man is the third film in the Knives Out series, which feature Detective Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig. It released on Netflix at the end of last year, and in this third outing, Blanc investigates the death of a controversial Catholic priest, aided in his investigations by the surviving younger priest of the parish, Judd. The writer and director Ryan Johnson grew up within evangelicalism, but he changed the setting to Catholicism for the better aesthetics, I believe. I understand that.
Yeah, well, it was I think the setting was actually an Anglican church in America because that kind of Gothic thing is very Anglican. It's not very Catholic.
Right.
Anyway, that's trivia.
Anyway, yeah.
I just wanted to own that bit.
Okay. You wanted to be understood it was an Anglican church. Thanks for that. It certainly wasn't a Baptist one. Well, it's received both a positive, popular and critical reception, with people noting a greater depth to this outing because it deals with matters of faith. And although fictional, its emphasis, therefore, I think, on matters of ultimate truth made it a really good fit for this episode. Did you enjoy this
Massively,
third outing?
Yeah, absolutely enjoyed it. And it's becoming a bit of a Christmas staple, the old Knives Out. Which I'm happy for Christmas staples. You know, you've got to have something to watch when the cricket only goes for 2 days. And so I thought, again, I'm very alert to how religion is portrayed, because you see it portrayed with such shallowness most often. But I didn't think this was the case. But there's still the kind of cartoonishness that the Knives Out series has. The characters are larger than life,
yeah.
a little bit two-dimensional,
sort of all the
you might say.
oddballs of the village kind of thing.
Absolutely. But at the same time, there was something fun and realistic at the same time about this. There was more to it than just cliche. The two priests, very, very interesting. The kind of young priest who's sort of pursuing his vocation, has a little bit of an ambition. What's he going to be doing? He's in a little bit of trouble because he's a boxing guy. He's knocked someone out in the seminary. So
he's killed someone.
That's right. That's right.
He gets moved to this parish because he's knocked someone out. An annoying deacon, I think.
Yes.
But
annoying.
But the reason why he's ended up in, holy orders, so to speak.
Because he killed someone in the ring.
Because he killed someone in the ring, yes.
Yeah, so there's something interesting about him there.
Yeah.
And then what you get then is a kind of really larger than life priest in who's got this kind of charismatic cult-like figure, and he's an incredibly toxic and nasty man. He's kind of
a Catholic priest shock jock kind of.
Yeah, that's right.
Manosphere.
People have said, all of that. And people have said, oh, well, is this just evangelicalism in Catholic garb here? But Catholicism has these as well.
It has its own as well.
So, you can have a priest in a parish who's got a kind of cult-like following, and can all the kind of manifestations of religious abuse are there.
I mean, it was certainly, I think, as someone within evangelicalism, it certainly wasn't.
We have ours.
Yeah, it was a familiar type, I think.
Yeah, or it's a type though. That's the thing. It's larger than life. It's caricatured in a real way. I thought that was great, and I thought also what was always going to be an issue with detective fiction. Detective fiction to me is very interesting because it arises in the age of empirical science. This is Sherlock Holmes. He's not religious, right? Sherlock Holmes. He analyzes empirical data.
Yes, I'm the man of reason, and I use man.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of see it in extremist, in most simple terms, in Scooby-Doo. You know how there's ghosts in Scooby-Doo, and they all turn out to be. Actually, it's the janitor.
There's no
actual ghosts. It's all actually explicable if you use the powers of reason.
Yeah.
And there's a temptation here in a religious setting for there to be only rationalistic explanations for things. And so, and you've got here the Benoit, what's his name?
Benoit Blanc.
Benoit Blanc, and he is that guy. But it's more complicated than that, isn't it?
It is a really, I think, faithful, I guess, examination of faith in the sense of the priest of faith at the centre is not played for a fool. In fact, in Benoit Blanc, he seemed almost to, I guess, be irrational in the sense that he, I think, is drawn towards the faith of the priest.
He can't explain something.
Yes, but the reasons why he walks away from that aren't themselves necessarily rational. It's just that they don't accord with his view of himself.
Yeah.
And the kind of person that he is.
No, exactly. So the detective himself is kind of not simply an observer. He's not simply a kind of person who comes in and solves everything. He's actually affected. So that's kind of interesting. I thought that was kind of almost a conversion-ish sort of experience. But at the same time, there's a crime to solve.
Well, and what's really interesting, so let's play this clip, I think, where Blanc and Father Jard argue about his involvement in the solving of the crime.
The guy I killed in the ring, I hated him. I remember I knew he was in trouble and I kept going and going until I felt him break. It wasn't an accident. I killed him with hate in my heart. There's no hiding from that. There's no solving it. God didn't hide me or fix me. He loves me when I'm guilty. That's what I should be doing for these people, not this whodunit game.
No, wait a minute. We're looking for a murderer. This is not a game.
It is a game! Solving it, winning it, getting your big checkmate moment. And by using me in it, you're setting me against my real and only purpose in life, which is not to fight the wicked and bring them to justice, but to serve them and bring them to Christ.
I mean, this this clip here, this really could have been spoken by an evangelical pastor. I mean, it's so focused on my purpose is bringing people to Jesus. It's about grace. Like I saw some people sort of putting out sort of complaints that you have a progressive and a conservative priest. But in reality, I don't think that's really fair to what's happening here. I think Father Judd is shown as someone with a real definite faith and a desire for people to come to faith, you know.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was like, oh, conservatives are bad and progressives are good.
Yeah.
I didn't think that at all.
But what's so interesting, and so interesting as we're talking about true crime here, is that Judd's kind of going, but my purpose here is not to solve the crime for you. Like,
No.
in the end, that's not. And, you know, it kind of talks to you because the controversial priest has got waylaid by other purposes as well of wanting to, like, you know, right the world so that it's more Christian again and all that kind of stuff, or his version of. While Father Judd is just going, I just want to bring people to see the grace in Jesus that I've experienced that has changed my life. And so he's kind of saying, yeah, it's not that it's not important to solve this, but in the end,
Yeah.
is this really going to make a difference to your life?
Exactly. So in the end, the crime becomes that becomes more important. And also, again, it's not discredited by the show. Like the whole thing doesn't expose, religion's a complete fraud, it's a complete con on everyone, because that would be a kind of mid-century version of a detective story. That religious explanation actually doesn't make sense. But actually, no, there's something profound about the Christian explanation for life, the way of seeing the world.
What was so interesting, I think I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed them all, but I enjoyed this third outing the most so far, is because the payoff in the end is not that the thing is solved, which is usually a payoff, right?
That's the
payoff here is what's happening in the relationships. And almost like I don't want to do spoilers, but sort of the redemptive nature of the end.
Yeah, that's right. So I think give Knives Out 3, if you haven't already seen it, because lots of people already have, but give it a look and make it a conversation starter too. I think it'd be a really interesting conversation starter at the cafe with your friends. So yeah, Knives Out 3, give it a look. Thanks for being part of With All Due Respect. Coming up next episode, whenever you try to talk about the gospel in the public square, whenever you try to preach the gospel in the public square, well, people have opinions.
They certainly do, and they tell you their opinions, Michael.
They mightn't tell you, but they tell other people in public, and, I should know.
You should know. You've run afoul of it fairly recently. Indeed. People have opinions about what the gospel is. We disagree about that more than you would think, I think. And how to present it in the marketplace. So how should we be people of the gospel in public? That's what we're going to talk about next. With All Due Respect is hosted by me, Megan Powell-Dutoit, and Michael Jensen. It's produced by Derek Yeo, editing by Alec Green and Graziella Adafune. With All Due Respect is part of the Hope Media Network, Radio 103.2. So go to hope1032.com.au and click onto our Facebook group to join in the debates with all due respect.